Have you ever stopped to consider how delicate success can be? A single moment of praise can inflate us beyond recognition, and a single stumble can remind us just how small we truly are in the grand scheme of things. Life teaches us, if we're willing to listen, that it's not always about what we achieve, but rather how we carry ourselves through the journey. This isn't the story of a massive fortune or a self-made empire. This is the story of a simple man who, for one brief season, believed that the tides, the storms, and the very ocean itself bent to his will alone. But life, in its infinite wisdom, showed him an unshakable truth. The arrogance of success lasts only until the next failure arrives at your door. Subscribe to our channel and stay with us until the very end. You'll discover that humility isn't weakness, it's the greatest strength a human being can possess. Because when everything falls apart, it's not your accomplishments that define you. It's who you are when no one is watching, when the applause fades, and when all you have left is the truth staring back at you in the mirror. This is a story that lives in the salty air of coastal towns, in the weathered hands of working people, in the silent prayers said before dawn breaks. It's about a man who learned the hard way that gratitude is the only currency that never loses value. Samuel Hayes was a fisherman with hands scarred by rope and salt, with eyes that held the color of the sea on a clear morning. He lived in a coastal town where the harbor smelled of brine and diesel fuel, where gulls cried their ancient songs at sunrise, and where the fog rolled in like a gray blanket most evenings. His house stood at the edge of the docks, a small wooden structure with blue shutters that had faded to the color of old denim, a porch that creaked with every step, and a kitchen window that framed the harbor like a living painting. Boats bobbing on gentle swells, nets hanging to dry on weathered posts, and a lighthouse that stood like a silent guardian watching over them all. From the time he was a boy, Samuel had worked the waters with patience and respect. His father had taught him to read the weather, to listen to the wind's whispers, to honor the ocean's moods. They were never wealthy, but Samuel never went to bed without giving thanks for what they had. Every dawn, before the sun painted the horizon with its first light, he would stand on his boat's deck and speak a simple prayer into the salt-laden air. Lord, give me the wisdom to cast my nets wisely and the humility to receive whatever you provide. His voice would carry over the water, mixing with the sound of waves lapping against wooden hulls and the distant cry of morning birds preparing for their day. His wife, Grace, had eyes like calm water and a smile that could ease the deepest exhaustion. She kept their home filled with warmth even when the winter winds howled outside. Together they raised Emma, a girl of 9 years with wild auburn hair that refused to be tamed by any brush, wearing oversized yellow rain boots even in summer, who would run along the docks counting boats and collecting shells as if they were precious gems from a forgotten treasure. In the harbor community, Samuel was respected and genuinely liked. He helped mend nets when neighbors were short-handed. He shared his catch when others returned empty-handed. He lent his truck when someone needed to haul equipment and couldn't afford the fuel. His name was synonymous with honest work and quiet dignity. His life, though simple and modest, carried a gentle light that others could feel when they were near him. That year, something extraordinary occurred. The winter brought the right amount of storms to churn up nutrients from the deep. The spring arrived with perfect temperatures, and the summer blessed them with calm seas and schools of fish so abundant that even the oldest fishermen couldn't recall anything like it in their lifetimes. The catches were spectacular, the boats returned heavy and riding low in the water, and the fish markets offered prices that made everyone's eyes widen with disbelief. The tuna ran thick and silver, the mackerel came in waves, and even the elusive striped bass appeared in numbers that seemed almost biblical in their abundance. Samuel's boat, the Grace's Promise, named after his wife, returned day after day with holds so full that ice had to be rushed from 3 towns over. The buyers came early and stayed late, competing for his catch. The offers climbed higher and higher until Samuel's modest bank account, which had always hovered near empty, suddenly showed numbers he had never imagined seeing in his lifetime. "Samuel, this is your season," old Mr. Patterson from the processing plant told him, slapping him on the back with genuine excitement. "You can name your price, son. This kind of run doesn't come along but once in a generation, if that." The trucks departed loaded with crates of ice-packed fish. The storage freezers overflowed with his name on them, and people congratulated him at the harbor master's office, calling him the most successful fisherman on the entire coast. The money flowed in like the tide at its highest point. Samuel paid off debts that had hung over his head for years. He replaced equipment that had been held together with wire and prayer. He bought Grace a new stove to replace the old one that only had 2 working burners. He got Emma a proper bicycle with streamers on the handlebars and a bell that rang clear and bright. The local newspaper even ran a small article about the remarkable season and featured Samuel's weather-beaten face in a photograph that made him look both proud and slightly uncomfortable with the attention. His fellow fishermen raised their glasses to him at Murphy's Tavern, the harborside bar where they gathered on Friday nights, toasting to his good fortune and asking for advice on where he was setting his nets. And something very small at first began to grow in Samuel's heart. A tiny spark of pride that seemed innocent enough at the beginning. A whispered thought that said, "I earned this, I deserve this," which felt reasonable after decades of hard work and lean seasons. But that spark found fuel in the constant praise, in the envious glances, in the way people now asked his opinion first in conversations, and it grew from ember to flame to something far more dangerous. He started to change in ways so subtle that even he didn't notice at first. His morning prayers became shorter, more rushed, more focused on asking for continued success rather than giving thanks for what had already been provided. His conversations at the dock shifted from asking about others to talking about his own achievements. When Jacob, his neighbor and friend for 20 years, a man who had helped Samuel patch his boat through countless repairs, asked to borrow his new hydraulic winch for a day because Jacob's old manual one had finally broken beyond repair, Samuel hesitated. The old Samuel would have said yes before Jacob finished asking. But this new version, this slightly different man, frowned and said, "Jacob, I'm running at full capacity now. I can't afford downtime for equipment loans. You understand, right? This is business now, not hobby fishing anymore." His tone carried an edge that had never been there before, a subtle condescension that cut deeper than any harsh word could have. Jacob's weathered face showed surprise, then hurt, then a careful neutrality as he nodded slowly. "Sure, Samuel, I understand. No problem." But there was a problem, and they both knew it, even if neither said it aloud. Grace watched this exchange from their kitchen window, her hands pausing in the middle of washing dishes, her reflection in the glass showing concern. That evening, as they sat at dinner with Emma chattering about her day at school, Grace spoke quietly. "Would your father have said that to Jacob?" she asked, her voice gentle but pointed, like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. Samuel set down his fork, his jaw tightening slightly. "Grace, things are different now. The operation has grown. I have to think like a businessman, not just a neighbor lending tools. There's real money involved now, real opportunities. I can't let sentiment hold me back from making smart decisions." His voice carried a firmness that was new, a certainty that bordered on arrogance. Grace said nothing more, but her silence spoke volumes that Samuel chose not to hear. At the harbor cooperative meetings, Samuel began to dominate conversations, his opinions becoming pronouncements rather than contributions to discussion. "If you all keep using those old techniques and outdated gear, you'll never see the kind of returns I'm getting," he declared one evening, standing while others remained seated, his posture unconsciously superior. "Invest in modern equipment, use the GPS fish finders, don't waste time on sentiment and tradition. The ocean doesn't care about your grandfather's methods." His words were sharp and cutting, slicing through the camaraderie that had always defined their community. Some fishermen shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, others exchanged glances, and a few simply stopped coming to meetings altogether. The word spread quietly through the harbor. Samuel's changed. Success went straight to his head. Before, if you stop by his channel and share your own stories of staying grounded, you'll join a community that understands the real measure of a person isn't found in their bank account. One Sunday afternoon at the Harbor Festival, a community gathering that celebrated the fishing heritage with food stands and music and children running between the legs of adults. Emma ran up to her third-grade teacher, Mrs. Sullivan, who volunteered at the Maritime Museum. Mrs. Sullivan, did you see all the fish Daddy caught? They wrote about him in the newspaper. The teacher smiled warmly, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. I did see that, sweetheart. Your daddy has always been a hard worker. Samuel, standing nearby with his chest puffed out slightly, his new leather jacket catching the afternoon sunlight, added with a tone that carried more than a hint of self-satisfaction. Well, to be honest, everything changed when I started making the right decisions. Understanding the patterns, investing in technology, taking calculated risks, the ocean rewards those who approach it with intelligence and strategy. Mrs. Sullivan noticed immediately what was absent from his words. Any mention of gratitude, any acknowledgement of fortune, any recognition of the 100 factors beyond his control that had contributed to his success. The word thanks never crossed his lips. The days continued to bring loaded boats and growing bank balances. Samuel bought a brand new truck, shining and powerful, with leather seats and a sound system that rumbled with bass. He replaced their old dock space with a premium berth closer to the harbor entrance. He installed a new freezer unit at home, commercial grade, big enough to hold a week's catch. He gave Grace a gold bracelet that caught the light when she moved her wrist and bought Emma a tablet computer for her schoolwork. There was nothing inherently wrong with celebrating success or providing for his family, but the spirit behind it had shifted. He no longer woke early to give thanks. He woke early to plan. He no longer listened to the advice of older fishermen. He dismissed their caution as fear of change. The man who once shared his knowledge freely now offered consulting services for a fee. The man who once accepted good fortune with humility now claimed it as evidence of his superior skills. Then came the first warning, subtle as a shift in the wind. The weather patterns changed almost imperceptibly at first. The marine biologists started talking about unusual water temperatures, about shifts in ocean currents that they couldn't quite explain. The fish that had been so abundant began to scatter, moving to deeper waters, changing their migration routes. Samuel dismissed these concerns with a wave of his hand and a confident smile. I've got the technology. I've got the GPS trackers and the depth finders and the thermal imaging. I can adapt faster than any fish can move, he declared at Murphy's Tavern, his voice loud enough to carry over the usual chatter and clinking glasses. The following week, his catches began to diminish noticeably. Not drastically at first, but enough that he had to stay out longer, burn more fuel, travel farther from the harbor. The seas that had been so generous were becoming stingy, withholding their bounty. The equipment that he'd invested thousands in beeped and chirped and showed screens full of data, but the fish simply weren't where the technology said they should be. Other fishermen, using their traditional knowledge and decades of experience, seemed to fare slightly better by sticking to methods that had served them through good times and bad. But Samuel refused to return to outdated approaches, convinced that his modern methods would prevail if he just pushed harder, went farther, stayed out longer. Then the storms began. Not the normal winter storms that everyone expected and prepared for, but something different. Fierce, unpredictable squalls that appeared with minimal warning, turning the ocean from calm to chaos in minutes. The Coast Guard issued warnings. The harbor master urged everyone to stay docked during the most volatile periods. Insurance companies sent notices about increased risks, but Samuel, whose confidence had hardened into stubbornness, continued going out. I didn't build this success by being timid, he told Grace one morning, as he prepared to leave despite dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Fortune favors the bold. Grace stood at their kitchen door, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself against the cold wind that was already picking up. Fortune also buries the foolish, she said quietly, her voice barely carrying over the sound of wind chimes clanging violently on their porch. Samuel paused, his hand on the truck door, and for just a moment something flickered across his face, something that might have been doubt or fear. But pride is a powerful force, and it pushed that moment aside. I'll be careful, he said, which wasn't the same as saying, I'll stay home, and they both knew it. The ocean, which he had begun to see as something he had conquered, reminded him forcefully of its true nature. A rogue wave caught the Grace's Promise broadside, damaging the hydraulic system he'd been so proud of. The GPS unit shorted out in the salt spray. The radio crackled with static, making communication with the harbor spotty and unreliable. Samuel managed to limp back to port, his hands shaking not from cold, but from the raw fear that comes when you realize how close you came to disaster. The repair bills arrived like accusatory letters. The equipment he'd spent a fortune on needed specialized parts that would take weeks to arrive. The income that had flowed so steadily was now a trickle, and the expenses he'd taken on based on that income suddenly looked like anchors dragging him down. At the harbor, the looks that had been admiring shifted to something else. Not quite satisfaction at his troubles, most of these people were too decent for that, but perhaps a quiet acknowledgement of justice, of balance being restored. Some remembered his words at the cooperative meeting. The ocean rewards those who approach it with intelligence and strategy. Now the ocean seemed to be delivering a different lesson entirely. One afternoon, as Samuel sat on a dock piling, watching other boats unload modest but steady catches, Emma approached him with the kind of question that only children dare to ask. "Daddy, did the ocean get mad at you?" Her voice was small, concerned, her yellow boots scuffing against the weathered planks. Samuel's throat tightened. He wanted to explain about water temperatures and currents and equipment failures, but those words seemed hollow. "No, sweetheart," he managed, pulling her close. "The ocean isn't mad. It's just teaching us to be patient." But inside, the question echoed with uncomfortable persistence. Had his arrogance somehow invited this reversal? He didn't believe in superstition, but he couldn't quite shake the feeling that the universe was sending him a message written in broken equipment and empty nets. The hardest afternoon came, without warning, as the worst ones always do. Samuel sat in their small home office, surrounded by bills spread across the desk like accusations. The mortgage payment for the new dock berth, the truck payment, the commercial freezer lease, the equipment repairs, the insurance premiums that had skyrocketed after the storm damage, Emma's tablet payment plan, Grace's bracelet purchased on credit. The numbers didn't add up anymore. His savings, which had grown so impressively, were depleting rapidly. For the first time in months, he felt the old familiar weight of financial fear settling onto his shoulders. Through the window, he could see his shining new truck parked next to Jacob's battered old Ford. Jacob, whose winch request he'd refused, was outside checking his nets, methodically repairing small tiers with the patience of someone who had been doing this work for 40 years. Jacob's boat, old and plain, had been going out every day and returning with consistent, if unspectacular, catches. Nothing to write newspaper articles about, but steady, reliable, enough. Samuel watched as Jacob carefully coiled a rope, his movements efficient and practiced, and felt something twist in his chest. Then Samuel saw something that made him freeze. Jacob was walking toward Samuel's dock space, dragging a heavy cooler behind him on a handcart. Samuel stepped outside, his pride making his voice sharper than he intended. "Jacob, what are you doing?" Jacob stopped, straightened his back with a slight wince, his weathered face showing no anger, just determined kindness. "Bringing you some of today's catch. Figured with your boat laid up, Grace and Emma still need to eat. And you can sell some to cover immediate costs." He reached the cooler and flipped it open, revealing fresh mackerel and sea bass packed in ice, easily 200 pounds of prime fish. Samuel stood there, frozen between conflicting emotions. Pride screamed at him to refuse, to say he didn't need charity. But something deeper, something that had been buried under months of arrogance, stirred in his chest. "I didn't ask for this," he said, his voice tight, defensive. Jacob looked at him steadily, and in that look was no judgment, no superiority, just sad recognition. "No, you didn't ask. You made it pretty clear you didn't need anything from any of us anymore. But I'm not here because you asked, Samuel. I'm here because I don't want you to forget who you really are underneath all this." He gestured vaguely at the new truck, the premium berth, the expensive equipment. I'm here because 20 years ago, when I lost my boat in a storm and was about to lose my house, you spent 3 months giving me half your catch without asking for anything in return. You told me then that we're all part of the same ocean, and when one of us is drowning, the others throw the line. Jacob's voice cracked slightly. So here's your line, Samuel. Take it or don't, but I'm leaving it here either way. He turned the cooler upright, wiped his hands on his jeans, and started to walk away. Grace had been watching from the porch, one hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes shining with tears she wouldn't let fall in front of Emma. Emma, for her part, ran to the cooler and peered inside with wonder. "Daddy, look! Mr. Jacob brought us fish. Can we cook some for dinner?" Her innocent joy at this simple gift cut through Samuel's defenses more effectively than any argument could have. That evening, they ate a meal of grilled mackerel that tasted better than anything Samuel could remember eating in months, though perhaps that had less to do with the fish and more to do with the weight he could feel beginning to lift from his chest. Later, after Emma was tucked into bed and Grace had gone to sleep, Samuel found himself unable to rest. He walked out into the cool night air, the fog rolling in from the sea, making everything soft and indistinct. He walked down to his dock, to his damaged boat that sat low in the water, and he did something he hadn't done in months. He got down on his knees right there on the wet wooden planks, not caring about his new jeans or what anyone might think if they saw him. He placed his hands flat on the dock, feeling the damp wood grain beneath his palms, and let the words he'd been holding back finally come out. "Lord, forgive me." His voice was raw, breaking on the words. "I confused my hands with your hands. I called mine what was always grace. I thought I controlled the tides, commanded the storms, owned the fish in the sea. Today, I understand that the pride of success lasts only until the next fall, and here I am, fallen. If there's still mercy for someone as foolish as me, give me back my humility. I'm not asking you to fill my nets again. I'm asking you to restore my heart. I'm asking you to help me remember what really matters." The fog seemed to absorb his words, carrying them out over the dark water where they mixed with the sound of waves and distant foghorns. He heard footsteps on the dock behind him, careful and deliberate. Jacob appeared out of the mist, holding 2 thermoses of coffee, his old peacoat buttoned against the damp chill. "Couldn't sleep either," he said simply, sitting down next to Samuel and handing him one of the thermoses. For a long moment, they just sat there, 2 fishermen in the fog, drinking coffee and watching the lights of distant boats blink in the harbor. Finally, Jacob spoke again. "You know what I learned when I lost everything? Everyone falls, Samuel. Every single person. What matters isn't the falling. It's what you do when you're down there looking up." Samuel took the thermos, its warmth seeping into his cold hands. "I'm sorry, Jacob, for the winch, for the attitude, for forgetting what you did for me, for forgetting who I was." Jacob smiled slightly, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "I know you are, and tomorrow's a new day. Start there." They sat together until the first hints of dawn began to paint the eastern sky. 2 friends reunited by humility, and when they finally stood to leave, Samuel felt lighter than he had in months, as if something heavy had been set down and left behind on that foggy dock. The next morning, Samuel did something that his pride had prevented for too long. He walked through the harbor community, stopping at each business and each home where he knew he owed an apology or where his words had caused harm. He knocked on Mrs. Eleanor's door, the widow who ran the tackle shop, whom he'd kept waiting at the dock while he took a phone call about his investments, treating her time as less valuable than his money. She opened the door with surprise, and before she could speak, Samuel said, "Mrs. Eleanor, I was disrespectful to you. I treated you like you didn't matter, and that was wrong. I'm sorry." He found Mr. Patterson at the processing plant and apologized for his dismissive tone when Patterson had cautiously suggested he might want to save more during the good season. He went to the cooperative building where the fishermen gathered for their morning coffee before heading out, and he stood in the center of that worn linoleum floor under flickering fluorescent lights, and he spoke clearly. "I need to say something to all of you. Last season, I got blessed with incredible catches. But somewhere along the way, I started believing that blessing was proof of my superiority. I spoke down to you. I treated your experience like it was worthless. I acted like I'd figured out something none of you could understand. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I forgot that we're all in the same boat, literally and figuratively. If I can ever help anyone here, my door is open. If I need to listen, I'm listening. The room was quiet. No one applauded because applause would have been wrong somehow, would have turned a genuine moment into performance. But you could feel something shift in that room, something soften. The kind of shift that happens when a wound starts to heal, when a fracture begins to knit back together. Old Tom, who'd been fishing these waters for 50 years and hadn't spoken to Samuel in months, nodded once. That single nod meant more than any speech could have. The storms didn't stop immediately. The fish didn't magically reappear. Life rarely resolves itself with dramatic timing like stories do. But something began to change that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with character. Samuel reorganized his priorities with brutal honesty. He sold the new truck, keeping Jacob's old truck in mind as he did so, and bought a reliable used vehicle for a third of the price. With the difference, he purchased and donated a new marine radio system for the community dock, one that would keep all the fishermen safer in emergencies. He took out the commercial freezer from his home and donated it to the harbor cooperative to be used by everyone. A shared resource instead of a personal advantage. He woke before dawn and returned to his old practice of prayer. But the prayers had changed. Give me wisdom in my work, humility in my success, and generosity in my blessings, became his morning meditation. He approached the other fishermen about forming a cooperative net-mending group, where they would gather twice a week to repair gear together, sharing skills and saving everyone money. What had been competition became collaboration. He opened his remaining savings not as a business investment, but as a community fund, a pool that any fisherman could borrow from during hard times, with the understanding that they'd pay back what they could when times improved. No interest, no contracts, just handshakes and trust. The ocean isn't our opponent, he said at one of these gatherings, his voice carrying none of its former arrogance, and neither are each other. We're all just trying to make an honest living from the same waters. Grace, who had watched her husband's transformation with cautious hope, found her own joy returning. The worry lines that had formed around her eyes began to soften. She started bringing homemade soup to the dock for the early morning cruise, not charity, but community, not pity, but care. Emma, watching her parents with a child's keen perception, learned lessons that no school could teach. She started a project at the harbor, cleaning up trash from the docks and beaches, recruiting other kids to help, teaching them that taking care of shared spaces was everyone's responsibility. She made a sign for their community bulletin board. We're all in the same boat, with a hand-drawn picture of their harbor. One morning, the sky shifted. The clouds that had been either absent or angry found a middle ground, bringing steady, gentle rain that lasted for 3 days. The ocean, which had been either too calm or too violent, found its rhythm again. The water temperature stabilized. The fish began to return, not in the overwhelming abundance of before, but in reliable, sustainable numbers. When Samuel's repaired boat finally went back out, he caught enough. Not spectacular, not newspaper-worthy, but enough. And enough, he now understood with every fiber of his being, was its own form of abundance. That season wasn't record-breaking. The catches were good, sometimes very good, but never extraordinary. Yet Samuel found himself more content than he'd been during his successful period. He measured his days differently now, not by the weight of his haul, but by the quality of his relationships. When other fishermen struggled, he was the first to offer help. When someone needed advice, he gave it freely without expectation of payment. When disagreements arose at cooperative meetings, he listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was to build up rather than to establish dominance. The changes rippled outward through the community in ways that surprised everyone. The cooperative, inspired by Samuel's community fund, established an emergency assistance program. Mr. Patterson created an apprenticeship program at the processing plant to teach young people the trade. Mrs. Eleanor turned part of her tackle shop into a small maritime museum, preserving the history and traditions of their harbor. And Jacob, well, Jacob continued being exactly who he'd always been, a steady presence, a reminder that true character doesn't fluctuate with circumstances. With time, Samuel experienced good seasons again. The ocean is cyclical and abundance returned. But when it did, he celebrated differently. Instead of buying new trucks and equipment he didn't need, he hosted dinners. Instead of bragging at the tavern, he gave thanks at home. He learned to measure his victories not by the size of his bank account, but by the width of his table, by how many people he could feed, by how many lives he could touch positively. At the Harbor Festival the following year, when a reporter asked him about his comeback, Samuel smiled and chose his words carefully. There's no secret formula. You work hard, you respect the ocean, you wait patiently, and you stay grateful. When good times come, you don't climb up on a pedestal. You remember that everything you have is a gift, not an achievement. Success doesn't make you better than anyone else. It makes you more responsible to everyone else. The reporter looked slightly disappointed, perhaps hoping for a more dramatic story. But several fishermen standing nearby nodded in understanding. That quote never made it into the newspaper article, but it lived in the hearts of those who heard it. One morning during a good season, Emma, now 10 and a half, taller and wiser but still wearing those same yellow boots, asked her father a question as they stood together on the dock, watching the sunrise paint the water gold and pink. "Dad, what does humility really mean?" Samuel thought about all the easy answers he could give, all the dictionary definitions and simple explanations. But instead, he pointed out at the vast ocean stretching to the horizon, at the other boats preparing for their day, at the lighthouse still blinking its steady warning, at the gulls circling overhead. "Humility is remembering that everything we have is borrowed," he said slowly, choosing each word with care. "It's understanding that the ocean doesn't owe us anything, that success doesn't make you superior to anyone, that your good fortune is a responsibility, not a trophy. It means recognizing that you're part of something bigger than yourself, and that your job is to take care of that something bigger, not just yourself." Emma nodded thoughtfully, processing this in the way children do, seeing through to the essential truth. Then she smiled, squeezed her father's hand, and ran off to help Mr. Patterson unload his morning catch, her yellow boots splashing through puddles on the dock. Pride feeds on applause and withers when the clapping stops. Humility feeds on gratitude and grows stronger in any season. Success that goes to your head separates you from others, isolating you in an ivory tower of your own construction. Success that goes to your heart connects you to others, binding you together in shared humanity. Those who believe they control the tides forget that storms can come at any moment. The arrogance of success lasts only until the next failure, but humility endures through every change because it doesn't depend on circumstances, it depends on character. Life doesn't measure your worth by the height of your achievements, but by the depth of your roots. The strongest roots draw nourishment from gratitude, service, and memory. Remembering where you came from, who helped you along the way, who stood by you when the storms hit. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If success has ever made you forget the people who helped you climb, today can be the start of something new. The real wealth isn't found in what you accumulate in your bank account or your trophy case, but in what you share with humility and grace. If this story touched something in your heart, if it reminded you of a truth you'd forgotten or needed to hear, subscribe to our channel. Share this with someone who might need the reminder that gratitude is the foundation of genuine success. Leave a comment telling us about a time when life humbled you, or share how you're working to stay grounded even as you pursue your goals. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. We're building a community here of people who understand that true strength comes from admitting our weaknesses, that real success is measured in relationships rather than revenue, and that the most valuable things in life can't be purchased or possessed, only received with open hands and grateful hearts. And if you're hungry for more stories that challenge and inspire, that remind us what really matters in this brief time we have on Earth, click on the next video. We're here to walk this journey together, learning from the wisdom of those who came before us and sharing these lessons with those who'll come after. Because in the end, that's what community is. A chain of hands helping hands, generation after generation, carrying forward the truths that matter most.